What's happening, guys? This is House Cat MMA, and earlier today I was just kind of moseying on about work, just cross my fingers. Nobody talks to me, and I had a random thought in my head, and that random thought was about a man by the name of Chris Tuchscherer. Chris Tuchscherer was one of Brock Lesnar's old proteges. He used to train at Team Death Clutch. And I looked his ass up, and he got himself a podcast on the YouTube, and it's all right. And then got me thinking. I was originally gonna put the UFC heavyweights that are fat thing to rest, but that got me thinking. I started thinking about Chris Tuchscherer. That was the heavyweight who was fat. And then I started thinking about other guys who were fat, and I'm like, there's still so many goddamn fat UFC heavyweights that I need to cover because they deserve to be spoken of and people don't speak about them enough. I represent the fat man, and this is what I'm doing on this video. This is UFC heavyweights who are fat, part fucking 3. Number 1 being Chris Tuchscherer. Chris fucking Tuchscherer went into the UFC with a record of 20 wins, 1 loss, and 1 no contest, if I'm not mistaken. It was either 20 wins, 1 loss, and 1 no contest, or 21 wins, 1 loss, and 1 no contest. He auditioned to be on season 10 of The Ultimate Fighter, but the UFC said, dude, your record's so good. Do you just want to fight in the UFC? And he's like, yeah, why not? He didn't do good in the UFC. He made his UFC debut at UFC 102 on August 29th of 2009, and he lost to Gabriel Gonzaga. Okay, this is back when Gabriel Gonzaga was still good. And then he fights Tim Hague, RIP. Beats Tim Hague by majority decision, and then he loses to Brendan Schaub, and then he loses to Mark Hunt. Then he called it a career. He's like, all right, I like it because he was like, all right, I tried the fighting thing, I tore ass in the regional circuit, try to fight in the UFC, prove that I could win at least one fight in the UFC, and he got knocked out by the heavyweight GOAT, Brendan Schaub, and Mark Hunt, and Gabriel Gonzaga. All 3 very respected heavyweights. And I'm kind of being ironic about, or facetious about Shaw being the heavyweight GOAT, but because he's not, but that motherfucker don't get the respect he fucking deserves. Next up, we got John Madsen. John Madsen was on season 10 of The Ultimate Fighter, and he beat Abe Wagner in the first fight of the first, the fight before the quarterfinals, whatever you'd want to call that, like what, the round of 16. He beat Abe Wagner, wrestle-fucked him for 2 rounds, and then he fought Brendan Schaub. And Brendan Schaub showed him what the fuck a Buffalo Bill does. And goes into the UFC after that, because just about everybody on the show, with the exception of like a couple of guys, everybody on season 10, with the exception of like maybe a couple of guys, got a shot in the UFC. I think the only guy that didn't was Wes Shivers. And Madsen beats Carlos Vimela, doesn't get spoken of enough, Gilbert Ivel, Mustafa Al-Turk, and Justin Wren. And then he loses to Mike Russo, and Mike Russo, I think it was a doctor stoppage between the 2nd and 3rd rounds. And since he was like the ultimate wrestle fucker, they just kind of decided that Madsen was not a hot commodity in the UFC, and that was like the end of his 5-fight contract, I'm assuming. And they said, yeah, we're not renewing your contract. And then he went 1-1 after that. Didn't beat anybody of notoriety, and he won after the UFC, but he lost to Chase Gormley, and then he kind of called it a career, which brings me to number 3, Chase Gormley. Chase Gormley went to the UFC at 6-0, lost to Stefan Struve, and got knocked out by Brendan Schaub. Brendan Schaub knocked out Chris Tuchscherer, John Madsen, and Chase Gormley. And then he gets cut, I assume, and then he, fights in the regional circuit. He gets a win against um, John Madsen and what's his name, Joey Beltran, and wins a few more of the fights, got nobody of notoriety, and then he loses to Tanner Bozier and Sergey Karatonov, amongst a couple of other guys. So he ended his career on a 4-fight losing streak. But that's another heavyweight who I enjoyed, who was fat. And now we got Mike Russo. Mike Russo is best known for knocking out Todd Duffy. Because, you got to think. Todd Duffy made his UFC debut at UFC 102, a lot like Chris Tuchscherer. And he, what was it? Yeah, Mike, I blanked. Yeah, he made his UFC. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm keeping that in mainly because I don't know how to edit, and this video is going okay. So Todd Duffy made his UFC debut at UFC 102, knocking out Tim Hague in, I want to say, 7 seconds. And so he didn't fight for 9 months after that. And then he made his comeback at UFC 114 against Mike Russo. And he was beating the dog shit out of Mike Russo for 2 rounds. And in the 3rd round, Russo caught him and knocked his ass out. And I stiffed him. And, people were kind of, he kind of got a little bit of hype after that. After that, he beat John Olavinamo. And then, once he started fighting the upper echelon guys, he fought Fabricio Verdum, got his ass whooped. And he lost to Sean Jordan, who was an upper echelon guy at the time. And then he kind of called it a career after that. And now we got the boy, Blagoy Ivanov. Blagoy Ivanov beat Fedor Emelianenko back in 2008 in Sambo. He went 16 wins, 1 loss, and 1 no contest before he was in the UFC. He was the World Series of Fighting champion. He defended that title 4 times. He made his UFC debut in 2018 in a main event against Junior Dos Santos. Loses that. He goes on to beat Ben Rothwell and Tai Tuivasa. And then he, drops a close one to Augusto Sakai, drops another close one to Derek Lewis. And he beat Marcos Rogerio de Lima after a 3-year layoff, and then he loses to Alexander Romanov and Marcin Tybura. And the thing is, none of his losses were by finish. Hard to finish. He's a guy who was hard to finish. The only guy that finished him was Alexander Volkov in the semifinals of a heavyweight tournament in Bellator. He's a tough son of a bitch. He doesn't get the credit he deserves. He fucking beat Fedor and Sambo in 2008. We're talking 2008 Fedor. I'm writing this down for some reason. We're talking about 2008 Fedor. Fedor was arguably at his best in 2008. I mean, probably not, but he wasn't losing yet. And Blagoy Ivanov beat him. I'm a Blagoy Ivanov maniac, and I'm a Marcin Tybura maniac for no goddamn reason. But that pretty much covers some more UFC heavyweights who are fat. I got this girl at work braided my hair yesterday. She gave me the fucking Joanna Jacek braids, almost. I think her braids were a little bit further apart, and her braids were probably a little bit better done. But she didn't do a bad job. I mean, she did this in 20, probably 15 minutes. She did well, but this is House Cat MMA. Make sure you do a little bit of liking and subscribing. Do a little bit of commenting and some sharing. Let me know some ideas you might have for me in the comments. Tell me what you thought of this video in the comments. And I will catch y'all later.